Well, welcome back to the next part in the adventure of the Valdor Tank Hunter. So, partially assembled, not all glued and everything. It took a while to get all of the shading with the dark wash done on all the parts. I'm pretty sure I got all the parts. There's a lot to it. But, you know, the wash really brings everything to life, and it's kind of note that when the whole thing is glossed and you have the enamel over the acrylic, you can actually, if you're not careful, you can wipe it right off, even when it's dry. But that's the point. That's why you put it on over the acrylic, because it just sort of settles in there, and it's easy to fix mistakes. It sits really nicely where you want it to, but it doesn't eat anything that's underneath, because that acrylic really protects it. So we're done here. We've got a little bit more detail painting to go. It's looking pretty good, though. I'm very happy with the results so far. Now, in the last episode, we also talked about putting on some markings, and I wanted to dress this up, but I wanted to keep it a little bit simple too. I didn't want to overdo it. I didn't want to go crazy. So I talked about giving it a very low number in the scheme of my army, which I did. So we've got number 120. Now I've also got tanks that are up in the 900 numbers. So these are all individually applied numbers there on the 120. Where did this come from? I don't remember. But I thought that was a pretty cool little Grim Reaper guy to use. And these decals, I actually believe this is from the Green Stuff World decal set. All of them, though, right down nicely over the gloss coat, and of course we need an Aquila on there since it's Imperial Guard, and their number again. These are actually from F-16 fuel tanks. I just thought they looked cool, like maybe fueling points on there. We've got some instructions for this hatch, no big deal, and there's some random placards and instructions just all around. Some of them are harder to read than others. There's one in black over there. They're just scattered around. This also from Green Stuff World, a little tank destruction thing with some hash marks. Have some markings on the doors for the commander's hatch, but keeping it simple, just keeping it simple. So what I want to do is just do a little bit more detail painting. For example, if you notice, I never painted the securing straps on these external fuel tanks. A little bit more bare metal dry brushing. So, after that, another gloss coat to seal all this work in, and then we can move on to some of the next steps. One of the next very prominent steps is going to be working on these little sponson weapons that we have to put in there. And the tracks. We've still got all these tracks to deal with and weather up, and tracks on the vehicle as well. So I don't think it's going to be more exciting to watch me do any more dry brushing in silver or anything like that. So I'm just going to do that off camera, and then we'll rejoin each other for the next step. We've got a nice glossy coat of Future on everything. It's making those decals fade right away into the paint job. They look great. So we're going to let this all sit for a little bit longer. We're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to go to these weapons. I'm going to grab my magnets here, which have some screws for some reason. I have no idea what they go to. But I have two sizes of magnets, and I bought these from Magic Craft a while ago, and they've lasted me a long time. And I have two sizes that I use. And these two sizes, I couldn't tell you exactly what they are, but they're pretty small. So in order to start, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this very small one, and I'm going to find roughly the center. And I'm not too concerned with getting this exact, to tell you the truth. Just get that kind of right there, and start a guide hole. And And that'll be good for everything we're placing there. And these magnets will fit in there pretty well, as you can see. So I'll actually, you know what, since I have all 3 drill bits, I'll just go kind of incrementally in size. And people stress out sometimes over magnetizing things. It's very easy to do. Really does not take a lot of effort at all. This would be the size I use for, say, the Hellfire missiles on Lehman Russ and such. That's a perfect size right there for how I attach them. Now we're going to gently start this hole off so it doesn't get crazy. And it doesn't have to be very deep. That's one mistake people make when they're drilling these holes. They go way too deep, and I might have even gone just a little too deep there, but not a problem. So we'll just test fit. And it is a little off center, but oh well. And that looks like fit pretty well. Let me just go a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is test fit the magnet in there and just press fit it in. And yep, looks like we're going to get it in just right. And I don't need all these magnets on there to make it work, but they're just there, so I'm using them as a stack because it's a convenient way to handle them. You could also take like a hobby knife blade and hold it on there, which is another way, and place it in. So we'll just take a little dab of super glue, and we're going to put it right in that hole. And oops. Now at this point, it doesn't matter, you know, when you're doing polarity or anything like that, it doesn't matter which side you've got going in. You just want to get one magnet in there, and that's all that matters. And then we'll take something and press it all the way in to the hole so it's flush. So we've got the one magnet in. Now at this point, polarity does matter because we don't want we want these weapons to stick. We don't want them to have trouble magnetizing in. And you see here, now I have the reverse polarity on there, the polarity that makes it go away. We want them to stick. So from this point on, it matters. So we're going to have to make sure that we put them into the backs of these weapons this way. I'm just going to put them like this. Let me make sure I got that again. Yeah. So if I put them on the blade like this, I know that we insert them that way and it works out. It's going to sit right about there. Okay. So we'll do the same process. You don't have to start with the holes the way I do. It just sometimes, especially when you're working with materials that are a little tricky, or sometimes plastic likes to crack on you and everything, starting with the guide holes just makes it a smoother transition. And transition is the wrong word. It just eases the big hole and doesn't tear the material up. Especially with some plastics, you just go with the one big hole from the start and it can give you some problems. And we'll just test fit this, make sure it's flush. That'll do. And actually, it doesn't really even want to come out right now. That might work just on its own. Sometimes you don't have to glue it and it works just fine. And there we have a heavy bolter that is attached, and that's pretty on there. And that'll stay and rotate as much as we want throughout the game. And that's the process. That's how you do it. So now I'm going to do, now you notice with that one, it fit really snug. We didn't have to glue it in. With some of the other ones, we might have to glue it in. You never know if you're going to get lucky like that. I don't want to dig it out to try to then re-glue it because you could damage the bolter. Sometimes you get lucky. I put a little bit more time into finishing off these sponson weapons, as you can see. A little bit more detailing onto each one of them. I drilled out the barrel for this heavy stubber, and again, just more detailing. I think it came out pretty good. Some hot metal effects on both the flamer and the las cannon, and a little bit of, and on the the autocannon and the flamer, I use some Tamiya weathering compacts for just some soot effect, you know, some carbon on the ends of the barrels. So they're all set, and then I gave them just a quick flat coat of Tamiya clear flat, acryl flat. I wanted it to be a different flat than we're going to give the rest of the vehicle, because I wanted it to have a little different effect when it's all done. I also took the heat shield, since we're basically done with this, and I gave this a semi-gloss clear. So we're all done. We can set this aside. So we can take all of these pieces and we can set them aside. The next step is going to be working with the tracks. So we're going to bring the cardboard back because this is going to get a little bit messy. I also gave the future coat to the tracks too, because we're going to have to get another layer of enamel going on this, as well as the ones on the vehicle, but I'll bring that back when we're ready. My favorite two-step combination for rustiness is going to be track wash and rust streaks. The track wash is a little bit darker, so that always goes on first, and then the rust streaks will go on top. And we'll just give this a good shake. And we'll get a nice big brush to put this on. This will do. And now the sides, some sides, obviously, since this is still attached to the sprue, are not going to get real good coverage here. We'll just get those covered up again, you know, in onesies and twosies once they're mounted to the vehicle. But I'll just go ahead and get this all done. Now, as I get these covered up, I don't want them totally covered. I don't want them super saturated. So before it even dries off, I'm going to do a little bit of a wipe down here. What I really want it to do is settle down into the crevices between the tracks. We want to see a little bit of metal color. Now, if you've looked at real tank tracks, you'll see a lot of variation in how the rust settles on there. Now, you see now we get like kind of a dark, old, rusty look with the metal poking through when we kind of brush off the excess there. That's what I like to do. In my background in modern armor, we get some rusty tracks, but you know, we take good care of them so they don't look decrepitly rusty, as in they've just been rusting away with nobody, you know, cleaning them, nobody caring for them or anything else. And that's what I like to portray. Some people like a super, super rusty track that looks like it's just been sitting out in an old battlefield, you know, out in the grass for decades with nobody taking care of it, nobody cleaning it, nobody changing the tracks at all. I just like to get a little base color for some rust. Now, I have never, you know, this is actually the first time, to tell you the truth, I've noticed there are track pads on Lehman Rust tracks right there, which ideally would be painted with a rubber color. I've never done it. I'm not going to start now, but it's funny because all the Lehman Rusts I've ever built, it's the first time I've ever noticed it. Now, I have said in another part of this video that the Valdor Tank Hunter is a very old vehicle. I've said that the STC is very old. I've said that each one on the battlefield is very old, and that is absolutely true. But you know, if you know anything about armor, one of the things that is changed frequently on any armored vehicle is the tracks. They have a limited lifespan in them, and if I'm remembering correctly, on Bradleys and Abrams, we used to change them every 5,000 miles of road wear. So if we want to be semi-realistic about this, we're not going to have 10,000-year-old tracks sitting on our Valdor Tank Hunters. They would fall apart, and they would just cease to operate. They would not survive. So let me finish this up, and then we'll get to the next step. All right, so now let's add some of the rust streaking color, just kind of sparingly across the top of this. And this is the rustiness to it. And this is a thicker kind of wash. It's not really even, it's not a wash, that's why it's so much thicker. Now keep in mind too, I still have no idea where, you know, these track pieces are actually going to go in relation to the whole deal. So I'm just sort of blotting around. Rust a lot of times forms on tracks where they connect on the pins, you know, in the border areas. You will sometimes see it on the flat areas, but a lot of times, since that it's constantly being scraped across the ground and stuff like that, you don't always see it there. You often see it on the areas where it can't be forcefully scraped off just by the natural operation of the tank. So that's what I'm working on here. Just kind of, and again, I'm gonna moisten a cotton swab with a little bit of white spirit when I'm all done, and just give a little wipe. Try to get the stuff in the corners, in the crevices, things like that. Like these big pieces, I'm pretty sure they're going to be on the bottom and we're not even going to see them. But since I can't really be sure right now, I just want to give us the option to have it all there. Now, I did the undersides with the other. We're not really going to see this, so I'm not going to do the undersides. What I want to do is get some on the sides though, just as we go. I'm actually going to use odorless thinner instead of white spirits here. And this will just get it kind of into crevices and everything where we want it. There we go. Let some of the metal color shine through. Okay, so I did some dry brushing here too of some gunmetal, just to bring out the highlights and everything of the metal stuff that would be in contact with, you know, ground and things like that. So we're ready to cut out these tracks, by the way, of course, did it on the vehicle too. Ready to cut out all these track parts and start to piece together where they go on the actual vehicle. And you guys actually want to watch me cut out all these pieces of track? Somehow I doubt that. Well, this has not been too hard to figure out so far. So we started with, remember, I already had from the last part, I had one already in there. So I put a single, and then I put a double with a single on it. So two and then one wrapped around, and then one of these guys, right, down that way. And then another single wrapped around, and then a long one so far. So I'm duplicating that on this side, and then we'll see what we end up with going back around. I was kind of afraid we were going to walk into this issue. I've had this problem putting together other things like Malcadors. We just run out of space, and there's not enough room to put in that one last track that we need. We need one last track to connect this, and there's just not space to do it. And the easiest thing to do would be just, it's on the bottom, to just leave it alone, to just leave it empty. I don't remember how I did it on the Malcador. Now, if we were to take this track out and move it up, we could put one more track in, but it would still leave us a space. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it empty like that. Because, you know, you'd hardly notice it on the bottom. It's just a flaw in the design. I don't know why they built it like this. So I'm going to glue these together for each side, and that will be that. I mean, you have all the tracks from a Lehman Russ. You don't need all the tracks, but it's frustrating that you can get so close to a nice perfect job putting all these tracks together and everything, and then just sort of get screwed because there just isn't the space to do it. It's real, I mean, on the tabletop, it's not noticeable at all. So I think I'm just going to leave it alone for now. And we're going to let all these tracks sit. I mean, it looks really good going around the front. We need to touch up these sides here where we snipped everything, and we'll do that really quick as we let this glue set. Yeah, sitting on the side, I mean, you barely notice it unless you know exactly where to look. Now, we've got a little problem here with the tracks on. And this problem was building before this. This was not just because of the tracks, but we got a little wobble here. See the wobble? And that's just because the pieces in the resin didn't quite fit together perfectly. So we're going to fix that though. I'm going to fix that with some 240 grit sandpaper. And basically all that nice work we did on the tracks, we're going to ruin that. We are just going to sand the bottom of this tank until it is flat and flush and it just sits nice and even. And I'm going to try not to take paint off grabbing it and gripping it too hard. Nice stable tank. Okay, getting there. So we're about ready actually on this, that we can start clear coating it. So my standard flat, and this is a very flat, if you're doing flat, is going to be Galleria, the matte varnish. I think I'm probably going to do some pigments though, now that I think about it, before we do that. Just to give it a little bit of grime and dirt. Not a whole lot, not a lot of mud and grossness all over the tank. So we're gonna mix up just a custom little blend of stuff. We've got desert, we've got European earth, we've got yellow ochre, we've got natural iron oxide, which actually I'm gonna use for some of the exhaust stuff, and we've got burnt umber. So I'm gonna mix up just a custom little dirty blend that we can put on the tracks, that we can put on the bottom of the vehicle and stuff. And we're gonna get to dirtying. Yeah! We're in the home stretch here. We're just waiting for the last of the pigment fixer to dry with our dirtiness on there. In the meantime, I worked on our commander a little bit. Now, I'm terrible at doing eyes. I am. So I just kind of didn't. But his uniform is refractive green from Vallejo. His little armor plates there are ink by darkness. We've got some German gray for the helmet and the wires. Steel Legion drab for his belt and equipment. And the standard, you know, if you've ever watched Duncan do a Warhammer tutorial on how to do uniforms and stuff, it's no different than that. Just very basic uniform and figure painting. So he needs a dull flat coat to go over and seal all that in, and he'll be ready. We can mount him in his open commander space, and then everything else will be ready as soon as this is dry for the overall matte varnish that we're just waiting to put on everything for our very last weathering steps. After a bit of waiting time, finally everything on this model is dry and ready to proceed to the next step. You might have heard some buzzing in the audio on the last clip, and I figured out that is because the wire for the external microphone was touching the wire for the power cable to the camera, and I apologize for that. That's what happens. That's a little interference. So what we're going to do now is we are going to give everything basically like I said, the top coat. This stuff is, if you have not used this, if you want the flattest flat you're going to get, this is one of the best options. It is totally acrylic. It is water-based. You can thin it down with plain old water. And you really do want to thin it down in about a, I would say even more than 50-50, like a 60-40, even sometimes even a 70-30 mix. The more you thin it, obviously, the more coats you're going to use to give it a really flat finish. But this stuff is amazing. So I'm going to load up the airbrush, and I'm going to get ready to give it its overall flat coat to protect all of the weathering that we just did with all of our pigments and everything. We'll see that in just a second. So there are some areas that still need to fully cure for maximum flatness, but I want to unmask this gun so that it doesn't interfere with any of the coating there. Did I make this so it could just slip off? Yes, I did. And I don't want to pick it up right now because I don't want any fingerprints to harden into the coating or anything, but it's a pretty flat coated tank. So we are just done with that, and it looks really good. Like, I know you can't tell right now, it looks really good from my point of view here. Very, very happy with it. Little pieces like this are a little bit more dry. I'm just going to drop it in. I'm not going to mess with it too much because, again, fingerprints and all that. But that's going to go on. It's going to look fantastic. Now, remember, I did a semi-gloss on the heat shield just to give it a little bit of contrast, and that's, again, going to look great against that nearly perfect flat finish that the Winsor & Newton's going to give us, and really make it stand out as like a separate piece of metal there. Commander, we'll fix him in his little area when he's ready. These doors, they're just about ready too. We'll get them fixed when they're done. So what's left, you know? What do we have left? We've done so much work. So we need to paint the searchlight. We need to do a little bit of exhaust marking on these engine doors, because there'd be some grease and some grime and some exhaust coming up. Engine exhaust here. And really, that's about it. I also want to hit these capacitors down here on this side with a little bit of gloss. I want them to stand out. I want them to be glossy, glassy kind of tubes, not just the flat of everything else. But oh, and then of course the viewports, periscopes, things like that. After that, this project is pretty much done and ready for a game. So I'm going to take a couple hours and let this sit and let it flattenize. That's a word. I made it up. Actually, I can pick it up from the bottom because I'm not worried about that. You can see the difference in the finish. It's looking excellent. Those decals really look like they were just painted onto the surface now. So we'll just let it sit, we'll let it rest, and then we'll come back to it when we are ready to finish it off. I attached the doors and I attached the driver because there's nothing fun or special about that. I did with a toothpick. I just scraped away a little bit of the paint in his hatch, and because I had it glued to here, there was no paint on the bottom of his legs, so the super glue had a great surface to adhere to. And we can hold on to this now, and you can see it's nice and flat, matte, however you want to say it, with all of our dirtiness sticking on there. I'm going to do some really good high quality pictures at the end of this whole thing. Put just Future on a brush to give a glossy coating to our capacitors again. So a few more things we need to do. So this heat shield needs to go in place right here. This is I've been dreading this actually. It's a very tight, odd fit where it needs to go. So I'm gonna apply glue, and honestly, I'm just gonna hope for a good first time fit, and that there's not a lot of problems with it. I have not been happy at all with the fit of this and the positioning of this since I started. Oh, there's the compressor. Since I started dry fitting all the pieces, to tell you the truth. but we're gonna hope for the best on this. It goes right in there. All right. There's a couple different pieces you have to fit in just right. And that looks good. I am pretty sure, I'm like 85% sure I got that in just the right way. Next is this cover that goes over there. So we're going to want to put some glue into these little recesses. Excuse me. You're going to want to get some over here. We don't want, you know, any glue that squeezes out now. It's going to be a little bit shiny on our matte surface. So we're going to want to try to minimize that. This also, if you remember in previous parts, I've had to do a lot of sanding and shaping on this to get it to fit just right where it needs to go. So here's hoping that all that sanding and shaping worked out, and it looks like it did work pretty well. Pretty happy with that. Got a little glue squeezing through, and while it's still wet, we can kind of remove a little bit of it. Not bad. Cannon can still elevate a little bit. Now I'm not sure if that's just if it does elevate, you know, in the kind of mythos of the vehicle, if this is for line of sight, for gameplay, or if it's just a function of the construction. I would imagine that, you know, if you think of actual physical tank hunter type vehicles throughout history, the cannon usually did elevate a little bit. So you would steer with the tracks in azimuth, and then you could elevate the gun a little bit. But we're just gonna, there it is. So we've got that done. I was thinking about what I'm gonna do for this searchlight there. And I think that the way that we construct, or the way that a lot of people, myself included, do the painting on a Lehman Russ searchlight is traditional, but also a little bit cartoony-ish. And here's kind of a traditional Lehman Russ searchlight, the way we do it with blue and highlights. You know, I think that for this project, I'm going to give it more of a scale model look with some chrome silver and then just a gloss around it to replicate a lens. Also, just to keep the depth in there and help with the look, a little bit of Nuln Oil just around the lens. Just let it kind of get in the crevice there. For the periscopes, for the viewports, whatever you want to call them on this one, I'm going to use Green Stuff World Color Shift paint, which is, I don't know, I'm just going with, you know, the whole modern armored vehicles. They've got coated optics, which give them kind of a refractive sort of look, and I like it. I like it. Now, in the past, I've just used some Model Master Acryl Hot Pink, which has kind of a metallic-y pinkish red color, which also, you know, gives that kind of modern optic look to it. But since I started painting other things with these paints, I really like the way they look, and I think they're gonna come out pretty nice. And give us a nice color shifting sort of prismatic look for the optics. And to get the full effect, though, we're going to have to do a few coats. Now, there's only a few different viewports we have on this. We've got the main driver's port. We've got the sponson gunner's port over here. And there are some very fine lines to get. We've got kind of a commander's side vision port, and then we've got one on the back. So it's going to be a lot of time just painting these very tiny coats on these very tiny objects, which, you know, might be some of the smallest, least noticed details on the vehicle, but every little detail helps. So I'm going to spend some time just doing these coat after coat inside all these viewports. Now, the advantage is because these are acrylics, they do dry pretty fast. I'm actually surprised. There's little to no visibility outside of this vehicle for the crew, except for the driver. And you know, I actually have not seen any gunner sights on this thing whatsoever, if we're being technical about it. How does the gunner see and aim this cannon? There's nothing there. Nothing there at all. But that's not my problem. That's the gunner's problem. Unless it's all aimed by the commander through his... Well, he has no forward vision port. None. He's got the side port and that's it. So, really interesting. Something I just noticed while painting all these vision ports. Anybody know? Does anybody know how the crew actually sees and aims this gun? Or is it all maybe done by the commander outside? Would kind of be terrible in armored warfare to only be able to fire a gun outside of the vehicle, not being able to fire it buttoned up. Go figure. I'm going to add just a few more little details to this before we call it done. I'm going to take some fuel stains and I am going to add them around the rear of the vehicle because we can. Now, this is more of a scale modeling kind of thing to do than a Warhammer thing, but I think it's going to add just a little bit. And so I'm just going to put them around that fuel hose as if it's kind of leaking out a little bit. I'm going to put them around those fueling points that I put on. And something that you can do is you can water down, well, not water down, you can thin down this with some odorless enamel thinner, or any enamel thinner really. And you vary the age of the fuel stain, lighter for older. I'm not going to get that complicated into it. But more stuff that probably nobody will notice, but you know, I'll know it's there, and I'll enjoy having it there. Rapid refueling and getting this thing back into the fight. And I'm going to put the fresh engine oil kind of around the exhaust a little bit, as if they leak. I'm going to put them around the access doors, like you know, where maintenance might be done. We have the last thing we're going to do, remember, is going to be that sort of soot and carbon and grime. These engine doors can be covered with stuff, you know, especially as the crew or the mechanics might be working on stuff. They close the doors, they mess with the hinges, their hands are dirty and gross. That's the life of a tank engine. The mechanics don't wash their hands and everything before putting everything back together. And you know why it's after the flat? Because engine grease and residue and everything has a very different sheen. So that's why I'm doing it this way. And, you know, spills filling the engine oil and everything, it all happens. So I have no idea what this thing is, but it looks like a great place where something might be leaking from. And the very last thing we're doing, we're going to go back to this natural oxide. It's iron oxide pigment. And we're going to... where is my little rubber applicator? Here. Just going to pick some up there. And this is better done on the flat because it really sticks to the flat much better than it sticks to the gloss. And you can just rub it right in, and it will really stick well and give you some very realistic kind of soot and exhaust looks. Now we're rubbing it in, so it's gonna stick. Some of the extra might rub off on fingers and hands if you touch it, but it is going to stick to the surface really, really well. We're going to put some on the doors here, as if there's just a little bit of, you know, heat and stuff coming up through here. And that's it. We're done. We're done with this vehicle finally. This is our completed Valdor Tank Hunter, and it is tabletop ready. It's going to dominate pretty much any armored vehicle it comes across in the game, and it's also going to look really good doing it. People are going to admire it, I think. I mean, but I'm a little biased because I built it. Lots of steps in doing it. You know what? We need to put a weapon on that. There we go. We'll go with las cannon for now. You know, I took my time doing it. It didn't need to take as long as it took, but I always have several things going on at once on my workbench, so that's why it took so long. I like that you can see the kind of glossy effect of those fuel stains, and as they dry a little bit more, they'll still have some glossiness, but you'll see them kind of look like faded old stains. And this, to me, just is a great addition to any vehicle I have in my army ready to go. Next to a very customized Lehman Russ I built a while ago, but a Lehman Russ nonetheless. You can see the size of the Valdor compared to the Lehman Russ. It's quite a bit bigger, and you know, it's funny because tank hunters are usually small and fast, historically speaking, but slightly different variation to the camouflage that I use for my army, and not nearly as weathered. I mean, this one is definitely weathered for the battlefield, but it's a fun project. You know, working with a resin kit is the same, but also very different in a lot of ways from working with a straight styrene kit. And it can be challenging and it can be frustrating, but it can also be a lot of fun, just because it's you know, a lot more of hands-on fitting and making stuff fit. I love the contrast in the gun tube there with the gloss for the neutron cannon and the color shifting paint. That's awesome. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I know that it's been a long time waiting for this last part of the last episode here. But like I said, lots of projects going on at once. I'm glad I finally got this guy all done so I can get it into a game, get it on the tabletop. Still kind of figuring out what I'm going to have in my 9th edition army. You know, some things are going to drop off. I'm going to do some new additions and everything. Anyway, what did you guys think of this? I'd love to hear everybody's opinions. Again, you know, we talked about a little bit the Forgeworld models being pay to win. We talked about throughout this some of the difficulties and challenges and differences in resin models. We know Forgeworld is expensive, and somebody had commented before that now you know, Big Picture Games Workshop is taking over the stats and the sheets on the Forgeworld models, so they're not as powerful basically as they once were. So it's more just like pay to have fancier models, not necessarily pay for powerful models and to win. Still love to know everybody's opinions on the Forgeworld models versus the traditional old Games Workshop models. I think they offer some really cool looking stuff that you're not going to find in a Games Workshop kit, which is kind of, I guess, the point. I don't mind spending the extra money for a fun model to build and having something cool to look at. Even in a collection, you know, I know some people that just build to collect and they don't necessarily play. For me, I like to play, but I get much more fun out of the build and just collecting and building a whole army. How about you guys? So again, thanks for joining me. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole build. There will be much more to come in the Warhammer area, in my regular scale models, my what ifs, my actual historical builds, my traditional builds, all that stuff. For those of you building along at home, keep building them, build them well, and I'll see you guys all again real soon.